My name is Joe Davis. I was responsible for the development of the Fairbanks Ranch community. I've been involved in the permitting, design, construction, sales, and marketing of the community, and have been privileged to have been a resident of the community since 1985. I raised my family here, and I'm still a resident of the community today. This region was actually acquired in the early part of the 20th century by the Santa Fe Railroad to develop trees for railroad ties that were to expand the railroads throughout the country. The railroad, after its first harvest, realized that eucalyptus trees that it planted millions of weren't suited for railroad ties. And so at that point, they created the Santa Fe Land Improvement Company to become a real estate developer to, frankly, provide somewhat of an exit strategy for them to figure out what to do with all this land they owned that was useless for the purpose that they had originally gone into business. When they did that, they created the town of Rancho Santa Fe after the name of the railroad. And Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford bought about 3,000 acres from the Santa Fe Land Improvement Company in the mid-20s to have what was ostensibly two purposes. One is an escape from Hollywood life because they were America's sweetheart and the famous Zorro character at the time. And also Fairbanks had this view of creating a fine estate of citrus trees and cattle grazing that would be his hobby. When I walked on the property, it was frankly a rainy November day. Absolutely beautiful rolling hills, abandoned buildings on a major portion of the property that were really buildings that housed farm labor housing, the offices for the ranch, storage for equipment. There was old, rusted, dilapidated farm equipment scattered throughout the property. There were very few trees on the property, and the majority of the trees that were here were dead citrus trees because, again, the property had been abandoned and so they weren't maintained. In the late 1970s, Watt Industries was able to assemble 9 parcels of land that totaled 1,237 acres from the original 3,000 acres that Fairbanks and Pickford owned. We're able to assemble that with the vision of creating a custom home community. The notion was to embellish the property by planting trees similar to what was common in the surrounding area with the eucalyptus and other indigenous trees, and to create smaller lots, but still large, but compared to a normal residential community, but smaller than typically found in the covenant area of Rancho Santa Fe. The lots in Fairbanks range from a half acre to 36 acres in size, with a typical lot being an acre and a half. And the notion was to create an opportunity for people to still have a large lot living environment, but with less of the maintenance and other obligations that would otherwise be found in a much larger property. One of the things that's interesting, San Diego Road through the community is 1.5 miles long. But one of the requirements that the County of San Diego imposed on this community was to build San Diego Road from the entrance, the western entrance of Fairbanks, 3.6 miles long to El Camino Real, and provide a dedication of the land 108 feet wide by 3.6 miles long to the county, so that it provided for not only the current road, which was an obligation to be built for this community, but so that the county could widen the road in the future to make it a 4-lane road if they decided to do that. When Fairbanks started development, there were nothing but dirt roads providing access to this community. San Diego Road was not there. It was, if anything, a dirt road that partly serviced the properties between the Fairbanks property and El Camino Real. There were a number of property ownerships between Fairbanks and El Camino Real. And so in order to meet the county's requirement of building this road, we had to either acquire the land or easements through other people's property to be able to build the road. We were fortunate that we were able to secure easements from a number of property owners because they felt that they were benefited by us building the road to their front door. We had to acquire easements from other property owners who weren't so magnanimous. But the biggest obstacle we had was at the western side, westernmost property was 785 acres that was owned by one property owner and who had been trying to sell the property for a number of years and couldn't find a buyer for it. And we were held, frankly, hostage to being able to get the road through his property. And so we, frankly, needed to buy that property in order to put the road through to service this Fairbanks Ranch community. The property owner turned out to be Danny Kaye, the movie star, and we acquired that property in the early 80s, and that's really what became the birthplace for Fairbanks Ranch Country Club and the adjacent communities of Stratford, Montecito, and Centerra, and Fairbanks Polo Club. The other thing that we tried to do was to provide assets to the community that weren't generally in the region. Again, you have to remember this is the late 70s. We built a sewer treatment plant. There was very little sewer in this region. We brought natural gas to all the homes here. There was no natural gas in the Covenant area. It was, homes were served by either electric or propane. We brought cable television to the community. There was no cable in this area at the time. All the utilities were put underground rather than having electric lines and cable lines and other poles throughout the community, which we thought made a much more attractive community. And probably most importantly, made all the streets private, gate controlled, which we thought added a level of both security and ambiance to the community that would be well received by the potential residents. The early 80s was a very difficult time for most business, but particularly the real estate industry. Inflation was double digit. Interest rates on borrowings was very expensive. Of course, the maximum amount of funds that were needed to get this infrastructure that I previously mentioned into the ground was at the front end of the project, right when all these adverse effects of the economy were being realized. We had nearly $100 million invested at that time with outstanding loans and equity during this critical period of time, and sales weren't as brisk as we had all hoped. There was a great concern among a number of people, our partners as well as management within the WAD organization, of whether this was going to be a viable community and whether we should take a different approach. So we engaged the services of, at the time, who was well known as one of the most well-renowned real estate marketing analysts that there was in the industry, who did a detailed study and came to us one famous day. We took the boardroom of the clubhouse and had a meeting, and he sat at the end of the table, and I will never forget it, where we were all sitting there feeling pretty glum and looking for any ray of hope that we could find in any way. And he sat at the table with his hands up and said, "Stop everything, stop everything." And we sat there quietly and tried to figure out, what is he talking about? And he went on to his monologue about how this community could not endure, and we needed to stop the entire project and redesign it and make it more of a conventional subdivision with tract homes, and that was the way we were going to cure our problem and get out of the project. And we walked away from that with great trepidation, and over the objection of a lot of our colleagues within our own organization, Ray and I had lots of conversations and agreed we were going to stick it out, and we were going to toughen it up, and we were going to do what we need to do to make it a success. And we were fortunate. It took a while. It didn't happen overnight, but after a number of years, it did turn out that the project was well respected and well received by the community, and it became a success. In the late 70s, early 80s, one of the obstacles that we had in marketing the Fairbanks properties was a view by a number of particularly older residents of the community that we were on not the wrong side of the railroad tracks, but the wrong side of the river. The San Diego River was viewed as a dividing line between the have and the have-not, and where we were on the south side across the river from the Covenant area, that was viewed as less desirable. So we had great resistance to our properties. We were also the so-called new kids on the block. It was viewed as a pioneering effort by a number of people because it was new and untested and the wrong side of the river. And so it really took a period of time for the community to get established, for homes to be built, for a reputation to start to be developed before sales really started to accelerate and the project became a success. It really was, but it took until the mid-80s and moving into the later 80s before that success was really realized. I've always been a believer in this project. I always thought the natural beauty of this property was absolutely unparalleled in the region. The location was superb. The concept of the size of the properties made a lot of sense to more people than other properties. And I thought that the commitment that was made to quality and to ambiance was something that people would recognize and want to be a part of. So I've always been a believer in this community, and have staked personally my life here by now being in my second residence in this community and having no desire to go anywhere else. I've been privileged in my career that I've been able to develop a number of communities and master plan communities all over the state of California. Without question, this is the pride of my career, and my life has been in this project.